Excellent. Thank you for confirming. So we have nothing prepared in terms of a lecture or any material we want to share with you during this live session. The whole point of this is that you have access to us and can ask any questions you have related to the lectures that you've had access to over the last few weeks. So we're here now just to answer questions you may have. Okay, I see there is a question put on the chat um, that came from the Google form. So let me read this out in case you can't see the chat. It says, ecologists often monitor the arrival of the Siberian stone chat to judge the health of a grassland. Why are migratory birds often considered indicator species? If the birds stop arriving, what does it tell us about the abiotic health of that environment? Actually, I kind of want to revert to Professor Kavita, who's a much bigger birder than I am. Hi, Kavita.
Hi everyone. Hi Maria. Sorry, it took me a couple of minutes to figure out the Zoom and join.
No
Yeah.
worries. We'll,
So I can't see because I joined just now, I can't see the question, unfortunately.
can you, can you see the
I
chat?
can see the chat. Yes,
Oh,
yes,
I'll put the
yes.
question back.
Yes, yes. If you can just copy it in again, I can. Yeah.
Yes. Um,
To judge
sure.
the.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure who's asked this question, and maybe you could. I'll try to answer it, and maybe then after that you could unmute and ask in more detail if I'm not getting at exact the gist of the doubt in your mind. So as Maria mentioned. Um, because so migratory birds go between, they need kind of two prime habitats, right? They need the for long distance migrants like the Siberian stonechat, they need like their wintering grounds, and they need the breeding habitats to be good, and some of them also make stops along the way, which can be important. I don't remember whether the stonechat does these stops or not, but there are some species that also do these stops in particular areas. So, migratory birds are considered indicator species because they can represent, they can indicate the health both of their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds. So, if birds stop arriving in a particular place, it could either be because that particular place does not, now there has been land use change, or for example, in some of the grasslands, many of the grasslands can undergo changes to becoming agricultural fields or plantations or something, and so they no longer provide what those birds need. Or it could be because of what they have experienced at the other end, so either their breeding or wintering ground, wherever the other location that they migrate to. And so for in some places, for example, in Africa, even kind of local migration, they look at how breakdown of migration might show how these routes have experienced a lot of disturbance. So I don't know if that's the question that you have in mind. If there is some other aspect you're thinking of, would you like to unmute and ask?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Actually, that definitely answered my question. But could we also infer from this that with late arrivals, like for example, flamingos in Mumbai, lesser as well as the greater flamingos, the delay is also, could we say it also probably delineates that the habitat is at loss or maybe because of pollution and degradation?
So the delay can be multiple things. Like you said, one of the things you've said is that delay could indicate some issues to do with the habitats themselves. However, if in many temperate areas, for example, they are seeing early migration, they are seeing changes in the date due to climate change. So areas are warming up faster and birds are arriving sometimes even before the insect flush is high. So some of the delays could indeed be because of habitat related factors, but some could also be because of, say, cues that animals are taking, birds are taking, like temperature changes that they are using to decide to begin migration.
Okay, could we also include AQI, like air quality index as well?
That I have not read. I mean, I've not read much about it. It's something to go into, but I've not read information on how air pollution could affect the timing of migration. Yeah,
Okay,
that, sorry. Yeah.
no
I mean,
problem. Thank
it
you so
is
much,
a
ma'am.
potential hypothesis, though, and could
Yeah,
be
yeah.
tested, right? If
Okay,
you're suggesting that air quality is poor, and
yeah,
therefore there's a delay in the arrival,
absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, it's a potential hypothesis.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see.
Um, if I may add to the previous question, if that's okay.
Hmm.
Yes.
Uh, right, I wonder now because AQI was mentioned. So if
Huh.
AQI has certain effects on the insect assemblages locally, and if this takes a certain amount of time, could this produce a delay in the future for arrival of birds?
Sorry, I just lost a
Yeah.
few of the words. I'm really sorry. Could you repeat it? I'm really sorry. I couldn't hear the whole thing.
Ah, yes, sorry. I'm maybe I can ask my question again in 5 minutes if that's okay. I'm outside, so I think I'll reach indoors in 5 minutes. Sorry.
Sure, sure. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. In the meantime, I could answer the question that's been put here on the chat. The evolutionary arms race. Predators evolve traits in response to prey, and prey evolve traits in response to predator. So they co-evolve. In the example of Daphnia and Pasturia, we got to see parasites from the future were less infected, less effective at infecting past Daphnia. So my question is, if they're both evolving, why only Daphnia became resistant and skull? Why the infection of the parasites lag behind? Ah, okay. Overall, the ability of parasites to infect Daphnia remained the same. Okay, so this might be my mistake in how I described this experiment. What they did find was the arms race, where parasites got better and better at infecting, and Daphnia got better and better at resisting. Now, how do we know that the arms race is happening? Is the way the experiment was done, where they sliced the soil up and took samples from past, present, and future, right? That's the timeline, right? And then they compared how well the parasite could infect the Daphnia at the time they overlapped, at the time in the past, and the time in the future. Right? And so, with that comparison, their conclusion was actually that both were evolving together. That any given point of time, the infection probability or the infectivity of the parasite was the same as it was last year because, or the last, like the past, because Daphnia has gotten better at resisting and they have gotten better at infecting. So it's just going back and forth, up and up and up and up and up. So it always is matched in time. So neither got ahead of the race. I hope that helps.
Yes, ma'am. This was my question actually. And ma'am, it is not important that in evolutionary arms race both will get stronger and stronger.
Well, if it's an arms race, then the expectation is that both are evolving to either get better at killing or better at defending. If the predator gets better at killing or infecting the prey, and the prey cannot evolve defenses to match that, then ultimately you expect the prey to go extinct. For them both to coexist, it means the defenses have to also evolve along with the weaponry or the skills of the predator.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
The second question is, when the predator is close to the prey, why is the cost actually very low? I'm trying to remember what experiment I described to have given that result. It depends on what cost we're measuring. So there's several costs to this anti-predator dynamic. There's the cost of staying and the cost of leaving. Right? And so if you think about an animal that is being approached by the predator, while the predator is coming, it's doing something else. Right? So if it leaves too soon, it's got a high cost of missing all the opportunities of its activity at that point. So there's a high cost of leaving too soon. That cost of leaving too soon declines as the predator is coming closer to the prey, because now the cost of staying is too high. And so now we've got this trade-off of how much you lose versus if you stayed, in terms of all your missed opportunities, time you're not spending foraging, time you're not, courting a female or defending your territory, all those activities you lose if you run and hide. But if you wait too long, you could die. So the cost that I may be describing here, and I must go back to my lecture to understand, the low cost of leaving when the predator is soon is the low cost of the missed opportunity. Meaning, at that point, there's very little time left for you to be doing anything else anyway, right? And so the cost of staying and gaining all the other benefits of staying, that is low. And so that cost is low. But the cost of dying, like the cost of risking death, is now very high.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
And then, Kavita, I think the third and fourth question.
Sure, yeah. So I'm not sure who has asked this. Again, it's written very broadly, the explanation of altruistic behavior, genetic basis. So I'll try to answer that. And then if that doesn't answer the specific question you had in mind, please do mention it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah? Okay. So, sorry, who's this?
No, ma'am. I have
Sneha.
asked the question. Yes, ma'am.
Sneha.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, as I think, as you know, altruistic behavior refers to a behavior which is beneficial to the individual receiving that behavior. Say, for example, either some parental care, some food being fed to it, or it's being protected from predators, and so on, but which comes with at a cost to the actor, that is the individual performing the behavior. And the question is, why should an individual do something at a cost to itself for the benefit of another individual? So one of the explanations for the evolution of such altruistic behavior is that you get indirect fitness. So this is a kin selection argument. The idea is that genes can get passed on from generation to generation. Genes can get passed on either directly from an individual having its own offspring, or because individuals share genes with relatives, genes can also get passed on if an individual helps a relative, does an act which is a cost to itself, but the benefit is genes are getting passed on because of the sharing of those genes with a relative. So Hamilton described this through Hamilton's rule, which is R times B should be greater than C, which is if we want to know whether a particular altruistic behavior has evolved through kin selection, we need to show that the benefit, the number of offspring offspring with relatedness being taken care of should be greater than the cost to the actor. So that is the idea behind how altruistic behavior could actually evolve through kin selection.
Okay, ma'am.
Does that? Yeah. Okay, yeah. And then I think you had one more question, no, about the monogamous system?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I think this is referring to. So what is it you want to know about this where the father or mother are individuals who are
Ma'am,
different from the.
I didn't understand that line actually.
Okay, yeah. So in a socially monogamous system, so imagine a species that we might see around a lot, like say these bulbuls that we see a lot. This bird species, bulbuls, are red-whiskered bulbuls, are socially monogamous, meaning a male and a female form a pair bond, and then they have eggs and chicks and bring up these offspring. Now, it's called socially monogamous because we can see these pair bonds formed between two individuals. But social monogamy may not necessarily mean that the male and female only mate with each other and that the offspring in the nest are only fathered by that male or the mother is that female. It is possible that the female might mate with males outside this territory, outside the pair bond. So, with other males who are not her social partner, and therefore, one or more offspring in the nest might have fathers who are not that social partner. For females, being not the mother, the way that might usually happen is if some other female comes and lays an egg. It's called intraspecific brood parasitism, where other females might come and lay an egg in this female's nest. We know much less about such intraspecific brood parasitism, but this extra pair, it's often called extra pair paternity, meaning the father is a male who's not a part of that pair bond. Extra pair paternity is actually very common in many species. Does this answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can you explain a little bit about social partner? What is the meaning of social partner?
That is where, say, like I said, in many birds, one male and one female form a pair bond, right? Like they build a nest together and so on. Or say you might have seen macaque groups. You'll have certain individuals, males and females, move together consistently for a long time. So any association which is built for a fairly long duration for that particular species, that is called the social bond. And if individuals are mating outside, so if you have one particular macaque group here, but the females are mating with, say, males who are in a different macaque group, that is called mating outside the social social group, social breeding group. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Some new messages are there.
So the question from Gaurav, can traits of cooperative behavior be passed on genetically? So certain species of animals are more open to cooperation than others? Sure. Um, if there are traits, like if it is a genetically encoded trait, which it can be, like sociality or gregariousness, those can have genetic underpinnings, then yes, of course it can be passed on from generation to generation. And if by being social or cooperative, that group or that pair gains a higher fitness advantage, either surviving longer or reproducing more, then more copies of that cooperative gene would be passed on to the next generation. So certainly that is how natural selection would cause the spread of genes encoding sociality or gregariousness or cooperation. Does that help, Gaurav?
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Mm.
There's one more question. So do they learn to interact with different species as well, like in a similar manner?
Well, social behaviors can
So
be
they know that a drongo is helpful to us and or a meerkat is going to give us food.
sure.
So that information is also passed on through generations. I mean, are there any studies done on?
So that's hard to say
Okay.
whether that specific information is genetically encoded, right? So can you imagine how would you have an allele that says drongo gives me information? That's very specific type of allele, right? So it's unlikely to be that. What it's likely to be is alleles that encode information gathering and processing abilities. Right? And so then those species are able to assess the environment, and then through social learning and individual learning, then you have this association between these species of providing information.
Right.
Um, but there are some obligate relationships between species. So some fish, for example, are cleaner fish, or if you think of like
Even the birds, cleaner birds, which work
yeah,
with the
cleaner
crocodiles.
birds,
Yeah.
right? And so you don't really need genes
Right.
that like for the mammals to have that says an oxpecker is good, right?
Hmm.
But an oxpecker is looking for parasites, and by removing parasites from these large mammals, those large mammals are tolerant to them. So you don't actually need specific genes for those specific relationships to see these associations happen in the natural world.
Yeah, and one more point that maybe these associations when the birds or animals of different generations are staying together, say parents and their chicks, they're staying together and they pick up certain traits from their parents. So it doesn't have to be genetic. And when they go on to become their own, they start their own group, they carry on these traits or behavior with them.
Sure, there's an element of social learning.
Social learning, right?
There's also elements of individual learning in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there was one more question that in the prides, when we say there's usually a male lion and a group of females, or they only come during the mating time. But do groups of lions, male lions, form a group, or they form groups with hyenas, which are a different species, as predators getting advantage, just like prey get this advantage of through dilution effect? Predators also, do they form long-term associations between groups of same species or different species over time? Because I've seen such documentaries on National Geographic sometimes, like five lion brothers staying together or lions and hyenas having association. So I just clicked that.
Yeah, sure. Usually when we think of these, I can sort of relate back to the answer that Kavita gave, where you have groups of individuals of the same species that are forming coalitions. It either benefits them in either better hunting ability or better like space usability when they're in groups. Those groups are often related individuals. Not always, but quite often. And so then those social groups actually share genetic material. So brother coalitions are quite common in large cats. Or brother associations especially are quite common in large cats. Now, the fact that hyenas and lions are found in the same place doesn't necessarily mean that they are actively cooperating. Um, there is benefits for the hyenas or leopards to be around to be around lions, if they have access to the kills that the lions do, and if intra-guild competition and predation is low. So in some of these large carnivores, the predators themselves compete and kill each other. So it has to be a system where you expect the inter-guild competition or the inter-guild predation to be low enough that the smaller of the predators, like the hyena, is willing to take the risk and hang around lions to get whatever kills they can. Is it active cooperation by both these species? Not doesn't have to be defined like that. It can just be defined as, a benefit that one gets, then they're willing to take the cost. And for the lions, if there's little cost to allowing them to be nearby, then they're tolerant.
Yeah, so it depends on the resources that are available. If the food
Absolutely.
is scarce, that the lion may not actually care about the leftover food. Or same
Exactly.
for scavengers as well.
Exactly. So the density of the predator and prey, the accessibility of the predator and prey, how much competition and predation there is, all of those factor in. Mhm.
Right. So we can
I
apply the
just
same
wanted to
models to this too. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, Kavita, please.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I just wanted to add to the first point you had asked about the coalitions in Lions. So, as Maria had mentioned, that you can get these coalitions either for hunting together to bring down larger prey or something immediately. In lions, it's also known, lions and some of these mongooses and so on. It's also known that these coalitions form because if they want to say take over a group of female for breeding opportunities, depending on the size of the group, a single lion may not be able to take over a group of females. Relative group size, meaning the number of lions in the coalition trying to take over a group, might matter a lot. So, and in which case, after that happens, depending on the relatedness among individuals, whether the dominant individual allows the other males to mate in the group and so on, is affected. Just wanted to add that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, Maria, before we go on to the other questions, I think Tanvi was out and then has come back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you were asking about migration, right?
Yes, Professor. Yes, thank you. Hi, nice to meet you. I just wanted to
Nice.
ask, I wonder, so can air pollution, for example, also cause cascading effects where the insect diversity either declines or becomes more homogeneous, and then that eventually in time affects bird migration patterns? And just to follow up, I wonder for like urban migrants, urban species, I wonder if, for example, for cities that already have a bird map and a bird atlas, whether using existing data on bird hotspots could be a way to sort of comparatively analyze what the foraging or like the food composition looks like, to do a sort of a primitive risk analysis.
Yeah, all are great questions. Theoretically, what you've said is absolutely possible that you can have these cascading effects. And because now we do have very good long term data on migrant arrivals, and we don't have abundances, but checklist data can be used to get a proportion of checklists with the species, for example, sometimes has been used as a rough index of abundance. However, whether one can relate it to a reduction in insect diversity, that might be a bit tougher. Okay, I don't know how much data are there on that, but one could maybe address it in a couple of different ways. So one could, do space for time, in the sense, if there are currently now areas with where insect diversity has changed in different ways, and then you look at how migrants there are varying, and if that matches your expectation, you test for whether it matches your expectation, that might work. There are also a few places where abundance of birds themselves have been tracked over time, and there again you could see whether, for example, insectivores show a different, whether certain bird guilds show a different signature in their populations over time compared to others in different dietary guilds. Yeah, but yeah, very interesting. I think now with eBird and so on, eBird data, many of these questions can be got at.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
I see another hand. Vivek, please go ahead, and then we can come back to the chat.
Good afternoon, professors. It's an honor to be with you. I mean, like looking at lectures and just sharing that excitement and that sheer bombardment of new information. Basically, I'm a school teacher and I'm a private independent educator. I offer international curriculums such as Cambridge International Education and IBDP, Environmental Systems and Societies. All the time, I get bombarded with a lot of questions. Sometimes I'm ill-equipped to answer those. That's the first reason I took up this course. I'm also an enthusiast like Gaurav, he said, into documentaries and all of that. So my question is, this is a common question from my students when it comes to genetic diversity, how that is important. And if the population over time, if they become genetically less diverse, they have this risk of inbreeding depression and then potentially leading to the extinction of the species. I would like to take a case study of cheetahs because that's the case study that's commonly discussed in the textbooks and in the curriculum. Of course, the documentaries and they all say a different thing. But I wanted to hear from scientists and professors like you who have done field research in this. Are we heading a dead road? I mean, are we heading a dead end with respect to conserving cheetahs? And there's also a case study on northern white rhino where there are attempts to take an embryo and implant it into a surrogate southern white rhino. So what's the reality of conservation of these species, which are like, they have very low population, they are genetically very, very less diverse? What's the future for them? Just wanted to hear from both of you, Maria ma'am and Kavita ma'am. That is my question.
Maybe I'll take a stab at this first. I'm an optimist.
Okay.
Ultimately, I feel like the link between genetic diversity and risk of extinction falls in this is there because we worry that the genetic variation that's currently remains is not enough to deal with change in the environment, right? So a new parasite comes through and their immune system does not have enough variation so that they can deal with it, then we're in trouble. Uh, yes, there is some concern that we've now had bottleneck situations.
Yes.
It's really few individuals, few variation, but they're still here. And bottlenecks have happened in evolutionary time very often, in fact. And we still have evidence that species can evolve, and if allowed to accumulate mutations again, will be able to increase the genetic diversity. Having said that, the world is different from what it was when these species initially evolved and had the time to accumulate their genetic variation. So I'm still a glass half full. I'm hoping that the environment does not change in a way, and we don't have some devastating um, parasite, for example, or disease or temperature conditions that animals cannot adapt to. But ultimately, if we do have those and the genetic variation is not enough, we will lose them.
Thank you, Professor Maria, for being brutally honest and being semi-optimistic on your take.
Semi-optimist.
Thank you, Maria. Professor Kavita, what is your take on this?
Yeah, I think Maria's already answered a lot of it. So you'd mentioned two things. One, you'd first mentioned inbreeding depression. So
Mhm.
inbreeding depression doesn't have to be an automatic outcome of low genetic diversity, because inbreeding depression refers to, recessive alleles now being, because of homozygosity, because of lack
Yes,
of
yes.
variation,
Correct,
recessive
Professor.
alleles, which usually would be wouldn't be expressed, are now being expressed, and many of these can affect growth, reproduction, etc.
True.
But a lot of species seem to, after, I think like Maria had also mentioned, after a bottleneck, especially if you have rapid reproduction, these kind of recessive alleles can get removed from the population,
Right.
because of which you might have high homozygosity, low variation, but inbreeding depression may not occur. In fact, like Maria was saying, it's surprising that there are so many small populations across, so many landscapes that are still thriving.
Mhm.
So inbreeding depression, in fact, one usually wants to try and look for it in wild populations rather than assume that a small population means they are going to experience inbreeding depression. On the
Okay.
other hand, the homozygosity issues are the ones like Maria had mentioned, that, with change, an animal is not, or an organism is not able to the population is not able to respond to it because there's not enough variation. And also, uh, the issue becomes then whether those individuals are confined to an area. So there are ways you can try to manage the situation. So, it becomes really important that, which is why with cheetahs, people are not too worried, because they are still found over a really large geographical range. On
Right.
the other hand, our lion population is fairly contained,
Shrinking.
although there is a lot of, actually, it's expanding, it's not
Oh,
shrinking, but
really?
it's
Okay,
still
great.
in a fairly small geographical area.
Okay.
And so when you have low, there are management actions one could take, which is, have multiple populations, so that if a disease turns up in one, because of kind of similar genetic profiles, it would spread there rapidly.
Yeah.
But there are other populations where it's not yet gotten to. So
Okay.
there are actions, one management actions one can take. And then the other thing that people also do is kind of do ex situ conservation, like maybe have a small captive breeding facility for animals
Yes.
that have come really low in their populations, like a kind of backup, that if one can do it, then one does captive breeding and reintroduction, and so on.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. You've expanded my horizons. My knowledge is very limited to the school curriculums, but looking forward to learn more from both of you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Um, Back to the chat. I see there's a question from Varsha. Okay, so with respect to optimal foraging, so we should actually this came in the lecture, and I guess there's some confusion. When we think about what an animal needs to eat, we take the following steps. First, we need to know of the various diet options, the various food types, what is the most profitable, next most profitable, next most. So we rank all the possible food items based on profitability. Now, if you remember what profitability is from the lecture, it's the amount of energy gained by eating that food divided by the time it takes to eat that food. So the handling time. So now we rank all of that. And then the first conclusion of ranking the different food types is that if an animal encounters the most profitable food, which means the food that gives you the most amount of energy, given how long it takes you to handle it to eat it, the predator or the forager must always eat that. There's no reason to ignore the most profitable food on the landscape. So conclusion one of an optimal foraging theory model is that an animal will always eat the most profitable food it sees in the environment. Now, the question to ask is, when should it add the next profitable food? And for us to determine that, we have to set up the inequality, which is, what do they gain by eating prey two or the next profitable food, relative to what do they gain by rejecting it and moving on and finding the most profitable food one. This is why the abundance of the most profitable food item is important, because we're saying that when a predator is moving through the environment or forager is moving through the environment and it comes across food type 2, which is second ranked in the predator in the list of profitability, we're saying you should ignore it, move on and keep looking for the more profitable item, which now means we need to know how many of those are available. How abundant are they? We don't need to know how abundant this one is, the second one is. And so that's why the abundance of the first one is more important. Of course, I can continue to rank this. So for example, if we do this calculation and we find out that eating the second ranked food does give them more than ignoring it and going to look for the first ranked food, then the question is, when do you add the third one? At which point the abundance of rank 1 and rank 2 food are both important. Does that help, Varsha?
Yes, ma'am. But does this follow the same when it has an option of third ranked food and a second ranked food? It would go further to in search of second ranked food than the third.
Correct. So the second ranked food does give them more. Adding the second ranked food does give them more than ignoring it and only looking for the first ranked food. Then now your diet of that forager actually is 2 items, rank 1 and rank 2 food, right? And so then the question to ask is, why 2 and not 3? Because we're trying to understand the whole diet, right? And so then we need to consider, well, how abundant is food rank 1? How abundant is food rank 2? Will you find enough of it as opposed to ignoring food rank 3?
Yes, ma'am. Agreed.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. And your second question here, in a fragmented or human-altered landscape, how might marginal value theorem predictions change? They don't, in fact. All you have to do is adjust the gain curve of your marginal value theorem to reflect the kind of environment you have. So for example, a fragmented environment. Sorry, excuse me one second. If we consider just tiny second. Right. Sorry, apologies. So when you think of a fragmented environment, we can think of that, if that whole fragment, that area is the patch that the forager has to go to, then we can create the gain curve, which is how much energy they get while foraging in that environment, to be lower than an environment that is not patchy or not fragmented and just homogeneously good. So actually, that's one way of just incorporating fragmentation into your marginal value theorem, where we now make the fragmented habitat poorer than the homogeneous good habitat. At which point the animal has to move a lot more within that fragmented habitat to get food items. And so it takes them longer to get food items. That's one way of adding fragmentation. Another way of adding it is that if you take that fragment and you just think of it as multiple smaller patches. Right? And then the forager now has to consider the time to travel between patch to patch. And so that's the value that goes on the x-axis before it gets to the patch. And then it's the foraging gain, the rate of foraging gain while it's in the good patch. So if your fragments are far apart, then the time to travel to go from patch to patch means that the distance travel needs to be far before they can start foraging. Or if the patches are close together, then the time to travel is close, and that will affect how long they stay. So it just depends on what kind of forager you're studying and whether you think that fragmented habitat is viewed by the forager as lots of little good patches that have to travel between, or if it's a single foraging patch that it has to forage within.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. yes.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Mhm.
If there are no questions, can I just ask one last question to Professor Kavita, please? Professor Kavita, I was very interested when you spoke about the lecking behavior in black bugs. I was also interested in the genetics aspect of it. Is this kind of a mating system? Is it more advantageous for the species as more males, genes, or alleles gets represented in the population than if you're talking about systems like where there is one male which controls a harem of females? So, which is more advantageous in terms of the evolutionary angle, in terms of having more alleles spread in the population for the species to survive in the long run? Something just thank you, Kavita. Professor Kavita.
No, please call me Kavita. That's fine. Yeah. So, first of all, the way selection acts, it would be at the level of individuals or actually at the level of genes, although it's the phenotype which is, kind of facing the selection force. So, there wouldn't be a question of, what would help a species survive, because, you can even have strategies evolve that can lead to the extinction of that population. Let me give you a couple of examples. So imagine that, for example, there is a population at high density and resources are starting to reduce very drastically. One might imagine that if every individual in that population agreed to cut back on their reproduction, that population would survive better. However, imagine a new mutation. A new mutation, which is a behavior which is have more offspring than others around you. So that would spread in the population because that individual is leaving more copies of itself than the others who have this older allele of don't, cut back your reproduction. So usually when we try to understand what kind of a strategy should be maintained in the population, we ask ourselves, what is the strategy that cannot be, like if you have a new mutant with some other variant, can that spread and take over? That's how we try to analyze what strategy should be seen in a population. Now that you mentioned lecking, it's actually really interesting because as it happens, in lecking populations, what people have shown, I couldn't talk too much about it, I just kind of mentioned it briefly. What people have found is that, in fact, a smaller proportion of males actually mate in a population. So, for two populations with the same, say, densities or say adult male population and female population, the one with lecking typically has less diversity. The reason for that is in lecking populations, a few males are able to successfully attract free females, keep their territories, keep away other males.
Oh,
And females also show a lot of choice for a few males. And so a small proportion of males actually mate with most of the females. So if you look at what proportion of males are now represented in the next generation, it's a smaller proportion.
so it's contrary to my belief, my assumption.
Yes, yes. Now the harem system that you mentioned, usually it's still polygynous in that it's one male mating with multiple females, but the ratios are not that high. So many
Okay.
more males are able to mate in a particular generation.
Got it. Thank you,
Okay.
Professor Kalika. Thank you.
There's a question from Gaurav about how animals decide what is the most profitable food. Is it based on taste, satiating hunger, giving them reproductive advantage? So animals actually all can taste, but in the classic optimal foraging models, we're thinking of just calorie gain. And so there are cues that animals can use about how many calories they get, and it could just be size or ease of getting at the caloric content. So size of the prey is a good indicator of how much energy you're going to get from that. They don't actually need anything further to be able to know if an item that they have in their hand or they have access is more or less profitable than another. If they've got simple cues like size and how easy it is to open, right? So the size and the handling. Now, your question here is in reference to when they move to a new territory. You're right. Of course, there's no way they know. So animals sample the environments. As they're foraging through the environment, right, they're updating their information about what is available. Again, these models, these optimal foraging models, and even the nutritional geometry models that we have here, assume that animals know what's in their environment and they have perfect knowledge of their environment, right? This is probably a big assumption, but not an entirely wrong one. In the sense, we expect animals to have sampled their environment enough to have a good sense of what's available to eat. So even if they move to a new environment and they're sampling, they're updating that piece of information, right? When we test them and we test these models, we're testing them at a stage that they've already figured it out, not at the learning stage. There's
Hi, I have a question. Can I please ask? It's a follow-up question.
Sure.
Okay, so if we had planned for the Asiatic cheetah translocation to India from Iran, would that have been a lot better? Because they are the closest living cheetahs, genetically speaking, to the Indian cheetahs.
Sure, but I guess the question is better for what? Better for their survival in this environment because of the similarity in ecotypes and environments, then sure, yes.
Okay, and I have one last question. It's about Asiatic lions from Gir, Gujarat. Do you think I mean, does the future look good for translocating them to other parts of India as well? If yes, then what habitats would be suitable for them?
Biologically, if we think as an ecologist, then of course there's plenty of environments that are suitable for Asiatic lions within India. But these decisions, conservation decisions, are often made um, with multiple factors in mind, right? Especially with India, we have people living in these places. And so we have to actually consider how much human animal interactions we're willing to allow and the politics of that. So, I mean, we can obviously think of it as ecologists, but ecology doesn't stand alone.
Yeah, that's true. Lots of bureaucracy. So, yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. Did I fully answer your question, Gaurav? I think there were other elements to this.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I think I got the gist.
You got the
So
gist?
yeah, basically we are it's more of personified observation that we make our own models, and actually don't give them credit for what they are, the information they have or the way they process. So
Yeah,
probably their senses are much better, and they over generations they have kind of imbibed that understanding in them that they know certain foods are better just by eating them or by
exactly.
trying them.
Exactly.
Like the elephants know where the best patches are in grass, and the leading female will carry on that information to the next. Or even the mice, or even smaller animals who reproduce a lot, they still figure out for themselves like which are the good eating spots, even in an urban environment or a totally arid environment for insects.
It comes from having some rules and then individual experience, right? So
Right,
the
right.
rules is like, I need to be able to get something with enough energy. And so as I'm sampling, they already figure out how long it takes to open different seeds and how much energy they're getting from it. Right?
It's
That's
exactly opposite to how humans do. They just follow an advice of a nutritionalist or an RD analysis to.
we
So,
have strong evolutionary underpinnings
yeah.
to the foraging decisions we make, but we also don't have the same sort of the same strength of selection as we did.
Probably it was there when we evolved as like Neanderthals and all, when we started farming instead of hunting. At
Mhm.
that time, probably things change and these things evolved. Yeah.
Though there have been some really interesting experiments with humans where if you give them a choice of food and not socially manipulating what they eat, we actually have very tight regulation of protein and carbs. Like we need 15% protein and the rest in carbs and fat. And so there have been really good experiments that show that humans actually regulate what we eat really well. What happens is that, we have social, other social influences that can sometimes override the biology of our nutritional regulation. Mhm.
I just wanted to, Maria, can I
Please.
just jump in here? Yeah, so just one thing I just wanted to mention because you brought it up and it's interesting, Gaurav, is how do you decide how complex a model should be? And whether it's a model in behavior or in ecology or evolution, uh, there are trade-offs to making models either very simple or very complex. So as you start adding complexity to a model, you typically reduce your ability to generalize. So, for example, if you start saying, this in my model, the animals are receiving information in this way, or they are using visual information but not olfactory, or you start making it more and more specific. They get spatial heterogeneity in the model and so on, then the understanding from that model, the predictions from that model would then be limited to a particular ecological context or a sensory context. So, very often people decide how complex to make their model depending on what universe they want to generalize to. So that's one aspect of it. So with information, for example, there are some very interesting Bayesian foraging models now that look at what happens if there's uncertainty in information. How will animals take on information, update their ideas about which patches are um, nutritionally rich and by how much and so on. So there is some of that goes on. So I just wanted to, because this is very interesting, I just wanted to make this point for everybody on the chat that modeling is extremely strong, a strong tool, and how complex you want to make it will depend on whether you want to generalize or tune it to say a particular system, which you might want to do if you're a conservationist interested in only a particular system. Second point I wanted to make is you're also mentioned in your question, how do animals know that if I eat this, I'll survive the winter better? So we often, I think Maria also alluded to this in her lectures, we often look at both very proximate traits of animals and kind of their, and also the adaptiveness of behavior. So, you might have particular workings of the muscles and the nervous system and so on that produces a particular behavior now. and understanding behavior from that point of view, this is how they are sensing, consuming, etc., is different from trying to understand why are they consuming this particular thing, and how has that behavior evolved. So when we make these in adaptive models, when we make these assumptions, kind of generalizing assumptions, that over evolutionary time, the food item that gives the most energy is the one that will result in animals surviving and leaving greater copies of their genes. We kind of assume that all this is worked out in these evolutionary models. But there are proximate models that really go into figuring out how information is obtained, how is it processed, and so on. It's just at a different scale. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to
Okay, thank you.
mention
Yeah.
that there.
Because what we are seeing is just the output that the surviving animals when we say fitness or so how do we know that if the animals have survived at the end of the winter we take data and we say out of 10 only 5 bears have survived. And then if we go on and back up, see if these bears are eating fruits and salmon and how that's how we'll probably understand the model.
Because the focus there is on the broader foraging strategies,
Right.
not on how information is acquired. But if, as an ecologist, I'm interested in information, how information is acquired and processed, then I would design my
Incorporate that
study to look at
information
that.
as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Ma'am, can you give a simple example of altruistic behavior that we can see in nature that is real?
Just a second. Before that, I just realized there's one question here, I think for Maria. How do researchers incorporate predation risk?
Oh, lots of ways. There have been lots of predation. It depends on which models we want to incorporate them in also. So if Swati, this is your question, if you are here and can elaborate, are you interested in how predation risk can be incorporated into foraging models?
Yes. So, for example, when we, from our lectures, you were explaining about when it comes to like wildebeest migration, right? And then there is, so even the predators know when the wildebeest are migrating, and wildebeest are also aware that where to forage and everything. So here, while migrating, they have to keep in mind of the predation risk as well. So if I am, if I'm analyzing the situation or in the field, like how do I take an account of this predation risk?
Okay, well, it depends on what scale of question you're asking. If you're asking, well, how much should, how much do we expect wildebeest to be eating in this environment when it's dangerous? We actually can measure foraging rate during focal observations, and we can combine that with observations of how vigilant they are. And so for something like wildebeest, you can actually see when they're looking up and scanning or when they head down and eating, right? So you can actually have a measure of the time allocation to foraging versus vigilance. And then that's one measure of how much, like how dangerous do they perceive the environment, right? So if they perceive the environment as very dangerous, you'd expect in parts of those environments, their vigilance, time spent vigilant is higher than time spent foraging. Versus in places that they feel safe, they will probably we expect them to have more time spent foraging rather than vigilance. So that's one way of doing that. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. I got a idea on this. But however, this is something that wildebeest needs to analyze the situation and take time over, and and then come to the conclusion that yes, for this particular patch is good for me, and then there is low predation risk, and it is good for the fitness and all the further life history of the wildebeest,
Sure.
basically. So that time is something is I would say is more for it to like analyze for a particular individual, if you see.
More than what?
Like how, so for example, a particular wildebeest has to go to a patch A, and then it has to take time to analyze that patch. Like how much that time taken is a lot, right?
It
To
depends on how reliable the cues are in the environment also, right?
Hmm.
If there are cues that are very reliable, like they can smell the chemicals, the chemical signals excreted by the predators, right? Then they have that information right away, right? If it's an environment where those clues are harder to assess or it's more complex to assess, then yes, it will take more time. So
Yeah.
it depends on how they're gaining this information, right? And for something like wildebeest, whether each individual has to gain it, or if at least some individuals in the group gain that, and then there's social transfer of information. So that's all going to be species to species, population, context to context dependent, right? How long it takes them to determine how dangerous or safe an environment is, and what they then do as a consequence, right? And we can study in so many different ways. Like Kavita was saying just now, it depends on what level of question we're interested in, right? Are we interested in the behavioral level? How does the animal change the behavior? Or the ecological level? What does this mean for the population in areas with and without predation risk or variation in predation risk? It just depends on what level we want to ask the question. And then we can accordingly study our animals.
Thank you very much, Maria. And it is more like so if it is so those species which are trying to migrate, right, for their resources, they have to be more vigilant in this case. Can we say that?
No, not necessarily.
Because they aren't aware of the what particular habitat that they are trying to go to, and then what kind they are not aware of the type of food they're getting.
The individual may not be aware, but the migratory route has evolved over ecological time. So the populations that are migrating are stopping in these set routes,
Okay.
right?
So
And
I would give you an example from where I'm coming from in this case. So I've been tracking butterfly migrations within southern India, and then which is dependent on the monsoon, right? And if there are no proper rains happening, and then we see that these butterflies, they go to fragmented parts of the patches for their migration. So in such cases, if you see, they might not be aware of what they are looking for.
sure,
Like
you're
they
right.
have to be more vigilant, like what they're trying to survive.
Sure, but when we say something like, no, you're right. They don't know the immediate ecological conditions they've landed into. You're right. But more vigilant than when? More vigilant in an environment that they have more experience in, right? It's always a comparison when we
Yeah.
say more vigilant, correct? So it sort of depends on what we're comparing it to. So to where they start from where they started in that area that they have more experience, then you can compare the behaviors of their site of origin versus where they stopped midway. And those differences in behavior will tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
got it. Thank you.
There is a question that MPTEL has posted that's asking if I can explain marginal value theorem. This was one of the foraging. Was part of one of the foraging lectures that I gave, and marginal value theorem describes our expectations of how long an animal should stay in a foraging patch. So it applies to animals that go from either their nest or their home area or even one patch Two, they have to travel to a foraging patch. And then the question we're asking is how long do you stay there and forage before you leave and come back? Right? So that's what marginal value theorem models are trying to predict. How long do you stay in the patch given a few pieces of information? One, how far you had to travel or how much time it took for you to travel to get to that patch. What is your energy gain as you're foraging in the patch? So we usually draw this as a curve where as the animal is foraging in the patch, it gets more and more food until a point where it starts to plateau. And the reason it starts to plateau is because it starts to get harder and harder to find the food. So one way to think about this is to think of a bird that's going into a grassy field and is looking for insects. So when it first gets there, it can find an insect easily, and then another insect, another insect. And after a while, there'll be fewer insects in that patch. And so therefore, even though it's staying longer, it's not getting as many insects. So the amount of energy they get over time will diminish. And so this is a diminishing returns curve. So based on the shape of that curve and how much time they took to travel there, you can intersect those 2 points, the beginning travel time against the shape of the curve, to predict when a forager should leave that patch because it's no longer worth the time to get more energy. So that's what the marginal value theorem predicts. We can modify that in several ways by adjusting how long they have to travel or adjusting this gain curve to predict how long a forager should stay in patches under different conditions. I hope this helps. And if it doesn't, please put this question on the Google, on our question answer, and I can give you a longer answer.
Oh, we've gone over. I just happened to look at the time now.
Oh, that's
It's
true. It's
oh,
okay with me. If anybody else has more questions, we're happy to
yeah.
take them. Yeah.
Ma'am, I have a question ma'am, please give an example of altruistic behavior.
Okay, you tell me. I'm going to ask you. Have you seen anything that's puzzling, where an animal is doing something for another animal that looks risky or that doesn't seem to make sense?
Uh, ma'am, means uh,
Or
it
how
will
about the
be.
classic one? What do you think happens in honeybee colonies? So there, you have only one individual reproducing, and all the other females are sterile, and they help to take care of the offspring of this one female in there, right?
Yes, ma'am,
So,
worker bees.
yes. So that's a example of altruism because an individual is foregoing its own reproduction and it's helping to take care of another individual's young. Similarly, in groups, sometimes you see what has been called sentineling behavior, where some individuals, say in some bird groups, or there are these mongooses that form these cooperative groups. There, some individuals will go on to higher spots, either a branch of a tree or the top of a mound, and keep looking around for predators. And what people think is by them going out onto this exposed spot, they are much more vulnerable towards predation, so they consider that an altruistic behavior.
Okay,
But in
ma'am, thank you.
many cooperative breeding species where individuals help to bring up their brothers and sisters, that's also an altruistic behavior. Or where individuals share their food with others, so they are losing their own energy gain to give that food to others. In several animals that happens. That's also considered altruistic.
Okay, ma'am.
Ma'am, I had a question about the bees. So, bees or ants or termites, they are basically all individuals of children of the queen bee, right? So they are actually protecting, or they not, or are they not?
So yeah, finish your question. Sorry, I
So
didn't want to.
basically, like what we have seen in birds, so they are helping their parents out or their cousins out so that their own gene pool is conserved over time. So that same strategy is being used by bees where they are protecting their own genes, for their mother's genes, queen bees genes. And that is how
Yeah.
that cooperative behavior is initiated. If they were from different bees of some different colony were to put in that, they probably would not cooperate, or what will happen?
Yes, in the sense that in many species that happens to hold true, but in many of these species, there are also other kinds of what are called direct fitness benefits, meaning that individual's own survival and reproduction is increased. So, for example, in some of these wasps that a faculty member in our department has been studying for many decades. There again, you have the same system where one individual reproduces and the others help to take care of the young. But what they have also shown is that when the reproducing individual either dies and so on, the next one takes over. So there is future benefits that are possible. These females seem to be in a kind of reproductive queue waiting to take over that breeding position. In other species, so there are some cooperative breeding babblers, including many species in Africa and India, where there are other benefits, which is defending a territory. So in these areas, if individuals, instead of staying and helping their parents with the offspring, if they were to leave, they either the dispersal itself might be very risky, they could die along the way, or they might not find good territory, so they wait here and kind of pay for their stay while they are out looking for other territories to go to. And sometimes what also happens is the younger siblings that they are helping to take care of might join them, so they disperse together, and then the younger siblings now help the older siblings breed. So what people have found is it's way more complex than just kin selection, that there can be aspects of kin selection that you're helping your kin produce offspring, and therefore you're helping, in a way, you've evolved to pass on your own genes indirectly, but you can also get direct benefits like better access to territories, maybe new helpers helping you when you set up your territory, or taking over this territory when the older male or female dies, and so on.
Sorry to interrupt, Kavita, but we've just been pinged by MPTEL to ask us to close the session.
Okay.
They have
Yes.
to lead others. However,
Yeah.
what I want to say before we close is that if you want us to have another session next week, just let us know. We'll try and schedule an additional one.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Just let us know via the Q&A. Okay. With that, thank you so much. It was really enjoyable to interact with you all.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you so much, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
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 you
you,
you.
so much.
professors. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Yeah. Bye.
Forget to share it, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.